May 27, 1978 is an infamous day in the history of St. Joseph. It was the day 4-year-old Eric Christkin was indecently assaulted and murdered by Charles Ray Hatcher, one of the deadliest serial murderers to ever live in the United States. Hatcher was a one-man crime wave who was born in 1929 and began murdering at the age of 40. He would go on to murder 16 individuals over a 13-year span. He was born into an abusive alcoholic father's household and was harassed at school. When he was 16 years old, his eldest brother died. Following that, his parents divorced and his father departed the family home. Hatcher went to St. Joseph, Missouri, with his mother and her third husband when he was 26 years old. It was then that he started his life of darkness. Hatcher had a criminal record prior to his first murder, and he was able to deceive authorities by faking mental illness. He is one of the world's most heinous murderers, and his killings of many children are considered to be among the most heinous of all time. Hatcher saw an event when he was 6 years old that some psychiatrists believe would have had a greater impact on him than was known at the time. In 1935, he and his elder brothers were flying copper wire kites. As his older brother prepared to give him the kite, it collided with a high-voltage overhead wire, electrocuting him. Arthur Allen Hatcher was immediately murdered. Their father, Jesse, never recovered from the loss of his first son and resorted to alcohol for comfort. This downward spiral of sorrow and suffering culminated in his father's departure from home and subsequent divorce from his mother. Hatcher's father was a convicted felon who had a violent streak. He grew violent toward his wife and children whenever he drank. Hatcher became a prolific petty criminal after his graduation from high school and was twice imprisoned to Missouri's notorious The Walls Jail. He was eventually released into the world on March 18, 1959, after 6 convictions and serving terms. Hatcher transitioned from minor crime to more severe crimes within a few months after being released from prison. For the majority of criminals, an increase in their actions or perceptions of love is sometimes unavoidable. Likewise, this may be stated about the majority of serial murderers. Each murder occurs over a shorter period of time than the previous one and is often more violent or obvious. In the summer of 1959, just a few months after his parole, he tried to kidnap Stephen Pelham, a 16-year-old newspaper boy. He attempted to kidnap him while maniacally brandishing a butcher's knife. It is unknown how Pelham escaped, but he contacted the police, and Hatcher was arrested once again after being found in a stolen car. Hatcher received a 5-year prison term for the attempted kidnapping and vehicle theft. He was sent to maximum security after spending the most of his life in prison. He would flourish for the following 2 years in jail on his criminal status until his release. Charles Ray Hatcher was strangling a little child to death in a stream 1 month after humanity arrived on the moon, ushering in a new age of technical and human wonders. On August 27, 1969, he invited a 12-year-old kid to go in his vehicle with him. He drove him to a nearby stream and strangled him to death. He would eventually admit this during his trial. It had been just 2 days since a 6-year-old child was reported missing. Hatcher had given the little child an ice cream to distract him from his companions, who subsequently recounted the event. A passing dog walker stumbled upon the horrific sight. Hatcher was apprehended in broad daylight indecently abusing and brutally assaulting the little kid. He was apprehended within minutes, and the child, luckily, survived the assault. It was the start of Hatcher's long-planned game of many identities. He seemed to understand how to game the system and the authorities, having spent the most of his time in prison. He refused to answer any questions and referred to himself by various aliases when questioned about his identity. He would introduce himself as Albert Ralph Price before a judge in a California court. Due to Hatcher's unwavering conviction in another personality, the court ordered his removal for mental assessment. Hatcher was deemed as incompetent to face trial in 1970 due to insanity and pedophilia ideas. Although no psychiatrist could agree on Hatcher's diagnosis, hospital personnel suspected that Hatcher was inventing much of his mental anguish in order to avoid jail and establish himself as a more exceptional case. He was eventually convicted of Gilbert Martinez's murder and indecent assault in the winter of 1972 and sent to the California State Hospital for the mentally ill. He was classified as an indecent assaulter with a mental illness. Hatcher was unexpectedly released to a halfway home in San Francisco in May 1977. This was in response to findings during a parole board hearing that Hatcher had shown significant progress during his time in jail. It claimed that he posed no threat to the public. How incorrect they were. He attempted to knife a 7-year-old child very soon after his parole, but the charges were dismissed. His arrests, assessments, and punishments read like a horror novel, eclipsing even the most heinous offenders of the period. Hatcher was then classified as a fugitive from justice and was missing for a full year. Until he made his way back to St. Joseph, Missouri. On May 27, 1978, Hatcher indecently assaulted and murdered 4-year-old Eric Christian. Eric's corpse was discovered by a search team in an area of weeds and marsh along the Missouri River's banks. He had been indecently assaulted and suffocated to death. Eric's funeral was the city's biggest ever, and the people demanded an arrest. The police were only too glad to comply, and their inquiries focused on a single suspect. It was not Charles Ray Hatcher who was charged with the boy's murder, but a guy named Melvin Lee Reynolds. Reynolds was arrested under duress and condemned to life in prison after 9 months of intensive questioning during which he signed a fake confession. It would be another 4 years before the truth was revealed. Hatcher was arrested in September 1978 for indecently assaulting another 16-year-old kid. Hatcher was sent to the Douglas County Mental Institution in Omaha, Nebraska, but was freed again after just a few months. Surprisingly, no one realized it was Hatcher at the time owing to police protocols at the time. He had provided his arresting police with a false identity. Hatcher was then allowed to continue torturing and murdering innocent boys. James Churchill was stabbed to death on the banks of the Missouri River in Illinois on June 20, 1981. Hatcher subsequently admitted to the murder, explaining that his passion to kill had gotten the better of him. He said that after drinking with Churchill, he snapped and then stabbed him 10 times. He had left the knife protruding from his chest, close to his heart. Hatcher murdered an 11-year-old child on July 29, 1982, when he was 51 years old. Michelle Steele vanished after a dental visit. A day later, he checked himself into the St. Joseph State Hospital under the name of Richard Clark. This was done to divert attention away from him or to avoid serving another jail term. Simultaneously, a group of hikers discovered Michelle Steele's battered and shattered corpse. Hatcher was charged with first-degree murder a few days later, on August 3, 1982, when his description matched that of a guy observed on the riverbank the day Michelle vanished. However, he was accused as Richard Clark. Hatcher would not be found competent to stand trial in the Michelle Steele case until April 1983. He was sent to the Buchanan County Jail for trial and left a letter for a young officer while there. Please contact the FBI and inform them that I want to speak with them today. A critical case. Hatcher's message, written by hand. When FBI investigators came, Hatcher confessed to the killings of 16 individuals, many of them were children. Except for Michelle Steele, they were all men. He created a map to Churchill's body and detailed the burial sites and locations of each deceased.